Students, are we ready to go back to school? Parents, grandparents, are we ready for our students to go back to school?
Yes.
Students, I know how it is. We may not necessarily be all that excited about going to school because school can sometimes be filled with a little bit of drama. Amen? In fact, if we were honest, there are just some kids who are cruel. And I imagine even those of us who are a little older can think back to our school days and think of a few people who were a little cruel. You know, it's the time kids are going through puberty, their brains aren't entirely wired. We make sense of these things looking back as adults, but when we're going through them as kids, it's not always fun. Amen? The story is told of one boy who was picked on at school for everything. Poor kid. Picked on for everything. No matter what he did, other kids made fun of him. And so he prayed to God and he said, please, dear Lord, please, 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 give me a gift that would be so remarkable, so extraordinary, so miraculous that people wouldn't make fun of me. And you know what? He received a gift. And that gift was walking on water. And so during the summer, this boy who had prayed to God for a gift was now able to walk on water, so he went to the local swimming pool. What did he do? He went out and he started walking on water. And kids, being cruel as kids can be, looked at him and laughed at him and said, ha 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 ha, he can't even swim. Sisters and brothers, today's gospel has everything. Have you heard the story before in today's gospel of Jesus walking on water? We know that walking on water is physically impossible. Why? Because of a law called buoyancy. What does buoyancy mean? In order for something to float, it has to displace enough water for the water to push up against it and make it float. Have you thought about that before? Super tankers can weigh 500,000 tons, 500,000 tons. I don't know how much that is, but that's a lot. Why can a super tanker that weighs 500,000 tons float? Because it's displacing enough water that the water is pushing it up. Follow me? Which is why human beings can't walk on water, because your heel doesn't displace enough water for you to walk on it. But if you lie on your back, suddenly you float. Buoyancy. So in today's gospel, we have a story of Jesus walking on water, something that none of us here in this church is probably not, something that we're probably not going to be able to do unless we, like that boy, pray to God, please, dear Lord, let me walk on water. But instead of focusing on what we can't do, today's gospel and today's first reading suggests two things that we can do. Did you hear today's first reading? From the book of Kings, it was the story of Elijah. And Elijah, God appeared to Elijah in ways that Elijah didn't expect. Because there was a big fire, and Elijah was thinking, God is of course in the fire. God wasn't in the fire. There was an earthquake, and Elijah's thinking, God, of course, is in this earthquake. God was not in the earthquake. How did God appear to Elijah? In a whisper. How did God appear to Elijah? Whisper. In a whisper. And Elijah listened. So if there are two things that we can do, even if we can't walk on water, two things that we can do in today's scriptures. The first one is to listen to God. When's the last time that you simply sat and listened? There's so much noise in this world, amen? Sometimes it's hard to listen. It's easy to be distracted by so many things. When's the last time that we simply sat and were still and listened? Listen to that voice inside ourselves. How it is that God speaks to us through our own experiences and through our daily lives, giving us ideas and indications of how we might be better and do better. Maybe we can't walk on water, but I tell you what, I bet all of us, if we wanted, we could challenge ourselves to listen. That's today's first reading, listening. And today's gospel is about lending a hand. Listening and lending a hand. How did Jesus lend a hand? Don't you love today's story? Because in the gospel, when Jesus is walking on water, his heels displacing enough water to keep him upright, Peter decides to get out of the boat and to follow Jesus' invitation to walk on water as well. And when he started to go down, when he realized what he was doing, what did Jesus do? Jesus lifted him up. You know, every time we hear these stories from scriptures, we have to ask ourselves, these are not stories simply about people thousands of years ago, but these are stories for us today. How can we be like these people? And if Jesus helped to lift up Peter, what does that story tell me? What does that story tell us? That we too should be about lifting up others. Amen. Think about all the opportunities that you have to lift up others in your daily life. Whether that's your children or your grandchildren, your friends, your coworkers, your classmates. Not literally lifting them up, but finding ways to help to raise their spirits. Right? This weekend we celebrate Austin Pride. Hashtag Austin Pride. And isn't this celebration all about helping to lift up people who felt put down by others, made fun of by others, put down by society, made fun of by others, put down by their churches? It's time for us to stop putting people down, amen? It's time for us to start lifting people up. And I bet if we were to listen a little more carefully to that voice inside ourselves, how it is that God speaks to us, God might be challenging us to lift up others. We're getting ready to go back to school. Another way that we see ourselves concretely lifting up others this weekend is through the school supplies that we provide others, by equipping our students to go back to school, by blessing our students and all who serve them as they go back to school. How do we help to lift them up, knowing that there are challenges? How can we be the hands and the heart of Christ blessing them? And not always with words, sometimes with actions. Perhaps you've heard the great words that are attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis of Assisi purportedly said, "Preach the gospel, use words if you must." Meaning, you don't need words to preach the gospel. You don't need words to bless others. You don't need words to show others that you love them. You don't need words to lift them up. It's finding ways for us to be like Christ and to lift them up. So sisters and brothers, siblings, this week let's challenge ourselves to listen to that voice of God within us like Elijah and to lift up others like Jesus in today's gospel. Because maybe at the end of the day, maybe we can't. Maybe the soles of our feet can't displace enough water for us to walk on water. Maybe we can't walk on water, but I bet there are two things that we can do. I bet we can listen and lift